Alrighty, perfect. Once again, thank you so much for joining the second session in the Think Like a Scholar series. If you missed the last one, you can find both the recording and the presentation and materials on our website. Today's session is called Sound Like You Belong, and we'll be going over a couple different things. To set the tone for today, I want to make sure that it's clear that this session is not about changing how you speak. It's about recognizing that you already belong in academic spaces and learning a few tools to help you land your voice with clarity and confidence. A lot of us carry the idea that there's a right way to sound in school and that academic voice is something that only certain people can naturally have. In the chat or just quietly to yourself, what is one word that you associate with academic voice? And it's okay if you can't think of any. Some common thoughts that we first hear when we think of academic voice is somebody who's well spoken, somebody that knows all the terminology, somebody that speaks well, somebody that's confident. And a lot of us have kind of the same feelings around that academic voice and whether or not we can ever measure up to that. So today we're going to work through some of those feelings and not against them. We're going to figure out different tips and tricks and ways to work around this feeling of inadequacy that a lot of undergraduate students can have when it comes to feeling like you have a strong academic identity. So let's start by looking at where our assumptions are when it comes to having an academic voice. Before we dive into the techniques and tools, it's important to recognize that some of the myths we've been told about academic voice and what we're supposed to sound like. Many of us carry some invisible rules that we believe we have to follow in order to be respected as a scholar, and those rules shape how comfortable we feel when speaking. For example, academic voice requires academic fancy language. The bigger and more complex the words are, the more academic you sound. And you should always use a formal tone if you want to be seen as credible. These messages can make students feel like their natural voice isn't enough for them or that they need to perform academically instead of participating authentically. But the truth is, each and every one of these is largely a myth. These myths often silence the voices we need most, especially those from first gen students, multilingual students, working students, and anyone who didn't grow up speaking academically. We'll give you a few minutes to try one of these exercises. On the other side of the screen, go ahead and turn towards somebody nearby you, a pet, a plant, a family member, or even drop it in the chat if you're online and try describing your major or interest in the simplest sentence possible. So I'll give you a few minutes here, and then if nobody wants to share, I'll go ahead and share my own. But I'll give you a few minutes to try to come up with something. All right, and it's perfectly okay to be shy. I'll go ahead and share mine. So I am a biochemistry, medicinal chemistry student who has a specific interest in anesthesia and pain medicine. See right there, it's not about dumbing down what your major is. It's not about explaining every portion. It's about using your clarity in your subject to show your communication. So if academic voice isn't about sounding fancy, what actually matters? Now that we've gone over the myths, let's ground ourselves in what's actually true about scholarly voice. Genuine academic voice is about clarity and connection. By communicating our ideas effectively, we establish credibility and invite dialogue. Let's embrace a supportive environment where every voice matters. And remember, it's not about changing how you speak, but recognizing your inherent belonging in academic discourse. Clarity shows that you understand what you're saying, while connection shows how your idea fits into a bigger conversation. These two skills matter far more than sounding formal. To help you practice this, we'll break the scholarly voice into three simple parts. Sorry about that. All right, perfect. So you see that I have three different parts here. Think of these as your academic GPS, or the way you orient yourself in a conversation. There are three core markers of scholarly voice. I call them claim, frame, and connect. Let's go ahead and walk through them. Claiming means naming your stance, not as a final answer, but as your current starting point. It helps others understand where you're coming from. For example, from a public health perspective, I see this as, now let's go on to framing. Framing explains why your point matters, and this turns your statement into a contribution. Something as simple as, this matters because it affects. By connecting these ideas together, you can link them to something that already exists. A reading, another speaker, a class concept, something in your past. An example of this could be, this builds on mentioned earlier. Again, whether or not that is a reading that you had in class or even one of your peers speaking in the conversation, and you're building on what they said as well. For our next mini practice, I'll say a basic statement, and you can add claim, frame, or connect. Ready? Sleep affects memory. Is this a claim, a frame, or a connection? Perfect. A lot of you right off the bat are saying claim. And I love that some of you guys are adding some additional context. Absolutely. And that shift right there, where you guys are adding on that additional context, helps you move from stating to connecting. And that's kind of the core piece where you're starting to sound like a scholar. So let's help learn a couple tools that'll help you use these moves really quickly in conversation. So you already have the framework set up for you. The next skill in our practical shortcuts is what I like to call the 10-second scholar. It's a simple confidence building entry point for discussions. And it helps you with a quick way to figure out that claim, frame, and connect without overthinking it. So let's go ahead and go over the different pieces. We've got connect, which tells us what we're actually looking at. Focus, which narrows your idea to something specific, and why it matters. This shows relevance, which builds your confidence and credibility. Now let's take that claim that we just had on the last slide from a few minutes ago, where we say that sleep affects memory, and transform it using this 10-second scholar step. For example, I'm looking at how sleep affects memory. Specifically, I'm interested in differences across age groups because it raises questions about how learning changes over time. From there, you can see we've got the context, the focus, and why it matters. That took under 10 seconds, and it sounded confident, not complicated. Let's go ahead and do another practice. Again, turn to someone nearby you, even if it's an inanimate object, or type it in the chat, and use this structure to describe one thing you learned this week. Not your whole field, just one little aspect of something that you may have learned in class. And it's perfectly fine if you're feeling a little bit shy. I'll even give you my own example from my own work. So I look at how ADHD and IBS connect with each other, and I specifically look at inflammation within those two diseases and how they may interact with each other. Because if we can figure out how to lessen inflammation in one or the other, there is a possibility we can decrease inflammation in both. So right there, I took my project very simply, broke it down into that context, focus, and why it matters. And that's a good way to even start off with, let's say, an elevator pitch for your research, or even a concept that you're thinking about. Of course, even with tools like this, there will be moments when we genuinely don't know the answer, and that's completely normal. Let's talk about how to handle those moments with confidence. One of the biggest barriers to speaking up is the fear of being wrong. But uncertainty is actually the engine of scholarship and not a weakness. Instead of shutting down with, I don't know, we can shift into language that helps keep us engaged. Let's walk through the four categories that I have up on the board right here. We've got exploring, for when you are still thinking things through, knowledge, for sharing what you do know without overclaiming, next steps, for signaling progress instead of uncertainty, and engagement, when you're trying to actively engage with the conversation. We'll do another small activity, and you can kind of see a couple examples that I have here. But let's take a moment and rewrite I don't know using any of one of these four categories. So you see those examples down below, and this is how scholars communicate uncertainty with curiosity and not apology. These small shifts can make uncertainty feel less like a threat and more like an invitation. It's something that you're exploring, something that you're learning more about, and not something that you're uninformed about. Now let's take a look at the ways to communicate confidently, even when you do know what to say, but you're not sure how to speak up. Good scholarly communication doesn't require fancy vocabulary. It requires useful vocabulary. These phrases help you express ideas clearly without sounding overly formal. There's a couple different categories that I want to go over with you. Power phrases. Like the slide details, they help you express your observations, what I'm noticing, what I've seen. Phrases where you can go ahead and ground your understanding of a concept and share them with your peers. Inquiry phrases, phrases you can use when you have a question about something or a curiosity and you want to learn more about it, or you've noticed something that you want to bring up to your peers at the class. Things such as, this raises a question about, and then connection phrases. These are really great because you can connect any topic to any other topic. It doesn't have to be directly, unless the class requires, doesn't have to be directly related to a specific text. You can bring up your own background. You can bring up a text you read in a different class. The important part is to actively connect those two topics together in a way that relates. Most of the time, this will honestly just be this connects to, or this connects to a reading that I had last week, or this reminds me about something that we read already in a different class. So as you go through this week, I want you to choose one phrase to use in one of your classes. And I challenge you to actually use it. Equally important to having that useful language is noticing when language holds us back and the phrases that shrink our voice before we even get our words out. A lot of us have been socialized to apologize for taking up space, especially in academic environments. So I'd like to go through a couple things with you and really work on replacing that apologetic instinct with language that supports your presence. Let's walk through the categories. We've got thinking, question, contribution, and clarity. And instead of saying phrases like, sorry, this is dumb, you can try others like, I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. I have a question about this. Something that hasn't been mentioned yet is this. Or even when you're trying to clarify your understanding of how you're learning or how you're engaging in a discussion, are we using the same way here? Let's take these ideas and practice applying them to real life examples. Here are a few common apologetic sentences students use all the time. We're going to practice rewriting them in ways that sound confident and grounded. We'll go through each sentence and discuss how it can be reframed. The first sentence, I'm sorry, but I don't think this is a good idea. This undermines your confidence and credibility. Instead of thinking about explaining why or why not your contribution may be a good idea, assertively describe what your idea is. You don't have to apologize for participating in conversations, especially as an undergraduate student, where our whole purpose of being in school is to learn, it's to share ideas, it's to grow. Don't apologize for growing. Sentence two, I just want to add something, but maybe it's not important. Again, we are all undergraduate students. Don't diminish the value of what you have to say before you even have a chance to say it. For all you know, it might be the most important thought of the conversation. Be confident when you want to add something into the conversation. It's okay to bring something up and find out later that maybe you were a little bit off base. Maybe it was a little bit off topic, but that doesn't mean that it has no value and it's not important in the conversation. Sentence three is sorry for asking this, but you don't have to apologize for any of your questions or any of your contributions. And oftentimes you'll find that that again weakens your inquiry. You don't have to apologize for being curious. You don't have to apologize for taking up space. And you don't have to apologize for questions, especially once again, as an undergraduate student, our whole goal in being in class is to learn and grow and contribute. And feel free and confident to do that. This week, we challenge you to take one communication tool from what you've learned and to use it in a conversation. Whether it's a framing phrase or the 10-second scholar script, practice and build your confidence in academic voice. We'd like you to take a moment and reflect. What is one sentence or tool that you're taking with you today? Feel free to share it in the chat as you are reflecting, or not at all. Perfect. It looks like we've got somebody who's going to try the 10-second scholar script. And it looks like we have another person who's going to work on not apologizing when they speak. Awesome. I want to thank you guys so much for joining us again for the second session and the Think Like a Scholar series. As usual, our presentation materials will be available on our website, which you can use using the QR code on this slide. We will also be posting the recording to our YouTube later, and we look forward to seeing you guys for the rest of the series.